How adaptable are you? Could you live without the modern conveniences we have today? Could you live without electricity, the internet, your cell phone, not even a landline? How about no running water or no indoor bathroom? That's a biggie. Hi, I'm Hal, and I'm going to give you a glimpse of life in the 1800s, the 1900s, and 2000s. For the first 10 years of my life, I effectively didn't live any different than my grandfathers, who literally lived in the 1800s. Hopefully, this will show you what it's like to adapt to change, sometimes massive change. My family, father, mother, brother, and 2 sisters, lived in extreme isolation in a rural area of eastern Kentucky. We lived in a 3-room shack on a small farm, and my father worked as a coal miner. In those days, immediately after World War II, and actually previous to World War II, back into the 19th century, there wasn't much else to do except coal mining where we lived in Kentucky. And as a boy, I didn't know anything except this life, so I was content with what I had. I started school in a 1-room schoolhouse, 8 grades in 1 room, and the teacher taught all 8 grades, obviously not all at once. At home, on the small farm, we had a mule, a horse, a milk cow, chickens, hogs, and other common livestock of that era. And this is how we ate, by raising nearly everything, animal, vegetable, or I was going to say mineral, but we didn't eat minerals, on the small farm my father owned. The nearest store was about 5 miles from the house, and the only thing we bought was a few necessities such as flour, sugar, salt, etc. The nearest neighbor was also about 5 miles away, so the only time I got to see anyone was when we walked to my grandfather's, about 6 miles away. Now, to get there, we had to cross a very wide, deep river. And the way we got across was on an old swinging bridge. And it had wooden planks and cables, and it was a walking bridge only, very narrow. And it was about 300 feet or a football field, maybe more, across this bridge. And when I say swinging bridge, I mean it swung back and forth. As a boy, I was terrified of this bridge. So every time we would go to my grandfather's, I knew I was going to have to go both ways, go across and then come back. But at any rate, I made that, and I did it. I adapted to the bridge, even though I was afraid of it. And even though I was fairly content and ignorant of the outside world, after all, I was a child, my father was not. He had left home at 15, was in the 3 Cs, the Civilian Conservation Corps created by FDR, and he had also been drafted into the Army like most men in World War II, and he was stationed primarily in Alaska, where he was actually in a battle with the Japanese near the Bering Strait. It was not unusual for a man to drop dead at that time at about, say, 45, 50, or 60 years old. My dad decided to make a change and get out of the mines. Now, the reason men drop dead so early was because coal mining is a filthy, dirty, back-breaking killer of a job. Many accidents, cave-ins, things like that. So that's why he decided to leave. He went north to Ohio to find a factory job, which he did, and was in Ohio about 6 months saving money so he could move the rest of the family north. I was almost 10 years old and both excited and apprehensive about moving. In effect, I was leaving the 19th century, even though as a child I didn't think of things in that way. I just knew that I was going somewhere and I didn't know what it was going to be like. Before leaving Kentucky, I had only seen 2 cars in my whole life, and One was a late model something or other from that era, and the other was a 38 Chevy that my uncle owned. And I got to ride in the Chevy, and I didn't like it much. It was too, even though it was huge inside, it was too closed in, and it smelled bad. And there were spider webs in the back window. So it was not like riding in a wagon or a sled, which was farm implements that we used at the time, pulled by mules. So my first trip in a car was about 250 miles, and I got car sick. I mean, throwing up car sick, even though I somehow managed not to throw up. So I spent most of that trip down on the floor in the back seat. And this didn't seem to bother my younger brother and sisters. I have no idea why. Well, we arrived in Ohio on a cold winter afternoon in January. As soon as I got out of the car, I wanted to get right back in and go home. My adolescent mind couldn't understand the simple things that I saw. Paved streets, sidewalks, houses everywhere and close together. I didn't know that houses were ever built no more than 8 or 10 feet apart. Very close together. No forest, no fields, no hills. It was all so alien to me, I may as well have landed on the moon. We moved what little furniture we had into the half-double my dad had already rented for us. If you don't know what a half-double is, it's a huge house that's been divided into two places, like apartments, so they can be rented as separate places. And there were cars parked everywhere, along both sides of the street. I didn't know there were that many cars in the world. I started school the following week, and that was when the culture shock really hit. Both kids and adults had a strange accent, hard for me to understand, and I assume hard for them to understand me as well. And for the first time, I saw little black kids. Now, I had never seen a black person of any age up till this time, and I had never seen any other culture. So it was very difficult for me. It was very difficult for me to adapt to a mix of people and culture such as this. But in the following weeks, I had to adapt to an entirely new way of life. I hated it. Too much noise, too many strange things, learning simple things like what white bread was. And speaking of white bread, an incident happened during this time. The first evening we were in town, we had to get some food to eat. So at that time, I had never heard the word supermarket. I'm not even sure that supermarkets existed at this time in the early 1950s. If they did, they certainly weren't in the town we lived in. So we, as a family, we all walked to the nearest mom and pop store it seemed like there was a mom and pop grocery store on every other corner, and we walked to the nearest one. And inside, my mother began grabbing some canned goods off the shelf, and my father was picking up some boxes of things, cereal and whatever. And my father was standing near the checkout counter, and I happened to look down, and I saw this strange-looking, what appeared to me to be like a cake of some sort, and it was wrapped in this see-through material, which I'd never seen, cellophane. And I said to my dad, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, you know what that is?" "No, I don't." So he just turned away and shook his head. So I turned to my mother and I said, "What is that?" She said, "Oh, for Pete's sake, you know what that is." So back to my dad. I said, "I don't know what that is. What is it?" And he said, "Oh, for Christ's sake, that's a loaf of bread." And then it dawned on me. That was white bread that you could actually, it was actually packaged in a see-through material that I had never seen. And I looked at it, I scrutinized it, I looked at it closely, and I thought, wow, you can see the slices of bread in there. That's amazing. So I had actually seen white bread before. Now my grandmother, about once a month, or maybe 6 weeks or 2 months, she walked through the hills to a small town where she could buy things that she couldn't get at the local country store. And she had to walk about 10 miles, and 10 miles to town and 10 miles back. On occasion, she took me with her. And sometimes she would buy a loaf of white bread, or as we called it, light bread. And it was wrapped in waxed paper. Now, like I said, I had seen light bread, but I'd never seen it wrapped in this magnificent see-through material. So that was my experience with light bread. Now, life became complex, and for a while, my teachers thought I was slow and stupid, and I didn't think much of them and their sissy-sounding language. But gradually, I learned the culture of the place, but still despised it. I told my parents that when I turned 16, I was going back to Kentucky. I was going to go home. That became the family joke, like, oh yeah, he's going to go home, he's going to go back. And, well, obviously I didn't. Not everything was bad. I liked the indoor plumbing. That was a great relief in the wintertime. But even after all these years, I miss the simple, quiet life of my childhood. Now, as we move forward, the years went by, and I adapted well into the 20th century. By the time I was 16, my interest had changed dramatically. I no longer wanted to go back home. I had made a couple of childhood friends, and we were all interested in cars and girls. In spite of this, I liked school and did fairly well. Now, this was in the early 60s, and all males had to register for the draft at 18 years of age. So after high school, I tried to game the system by enlisting in the Army. I was going to show them and maybe get a better deal, which I didn't. And this was when the Vietnam War started to escalate. And the very month that, in June of 1965, when I was inducted into the Army, President Johnson sent over 500,000 troops to Vietnam. Now, I was not in that bunch. But due to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, I was stationed on an island near Cuba. The Army was another hardcore lesson in adapting. I like to think I was born in the United States, but I grew up in the Army. Suddenly I had to learn hard lessons about discipline and structure in life. There is no education I know that can teach so much about real life as the military. I met people from all across the United States and many foreign countries. Also at this time, I began to educate myself in a more conventional way, books. I have been reading from the time I was a small child and throughout my life. Reading and learning has done more than anything else to help me to adapt to anything new, not to mention education in a more conventional way. But that's a story for another time. So in the Army, I gravitated toward more educated people. And I don't know why that was. Uneducated people don't interest me because they generally don't have much to offer. Now, I'm not saying that people who have nothing but a high school education or less are ignorant or stupid. It's just that the college people that I talked with and made friends with in the Army, they did have much more to offer me, things I didn't know, than people who worked in a blue jeans factory. After the Army, I started to work for AT&T. My life's work has always been centered around technology. I went back to school working for AT&T, and for the next 25 years, my generation transformed communications from analog to digital technology. Now think of this for a moment. I had my first email address in the early 80s. At that time, most people had no idea what an email address was. Now all of this is about adapting. Not everyone does it. Not everyone does it well. Most people have to learn to adapt or simply fade out. All of this prepared me to adapt to the 21st century. So now we've come to the current way of life. And the takeaway from all this is never stop learning, no matter what your age. I'm 81 years old, and every day I try to learn something new because that's interesting to me. Remember the past, but don't get caught up in regrets. Regrets leads down a rabbit hole that you don't want to go. And it doesn't do any good. Regrets are like the runway behind you that is useless. We all have regrets unless you are without a conscience, so everything is about adapting. Everything changes at a more rapid rate now than when I was young. But nevertheless, if I, at 81 years old, could come out of the deep woods and effectively today use a smartphone, a computer with different operating systems like Windows, Mac, Linux, learn coding, make a YouTube video starting from scratch. So you, no matter what your age, can learn to adapt to anything, even those damn kids and their cell phones and social media. Little joke. I don't have anything against. I don't really care what they do today. I did worse things than when I was young. So that's about all I have for now. Thanks for watching. See you on the flip side.